Yesterday, Governor Greg Abbott of Texas declared the Biden administration to be in violation of the Constitution, Joe Biden to be in violation of his oath, and the federal government to be in violation of the law. And for this, he has asserted the right to the jurisdiction on the international border. Following a Supreme Court ruling that the feds could remove border barriers, the Texas National Guard deployed more razor wire on the border, and Governor Greg Abbott asserted his right to expand his operation. Following this, several states have begun lining up alongside Texas, voicing their support for what Greg Abbott is doing. Florida has actually sent personnel and assistance. Some other states have done the same. It's hard to collect all of the most up-to-date information, as right now, more individuals are starting to line up in defense of Texas. This is quite possibly the most serious constitutional crisis this country has seen since the Civil War. I know a lot of people talk about, could there be a civil war? Would there be a civil war? And what we're seeing right now, I would describe as Fort Sumter-esque. There's a lot to break down. Far leftists are calling for the feds to assert their authority by force. You've got Democrat politicians demanding the Biden administration seek to federalize the Texas National Guard, stripping them of their authority and their right to defend their own border. Leftists are letting the mask slip, saying that this is chaos and we must allow illegal activity in the United States. Well, I'm glad they're doing it, to be completely honest. We've got some tweets to show you, because regular people are aware that this is a crisis. Democrats in major cities view the migrant situation as a serious crisis. So when the far left personalities come out in defense of this, when the Biden administration comes out in defense of one of the largest human smuggling operations, nay, when the Biden administration is found to be complicit in facilitating human smuggling operations, regular people can see exactly what's happening. Now, I've been asked many times over the past several years, as I've discussed the possibility of civil war. What do you think? There's going to be a bunch of armed soldiers from the states fighting with the federal government? That'll never happen. I got to be honest. I agreed with that. This is what's fascinating. Several years ago, when the prospect of civil war began to emerge due to the street violence and what we would describe as civil strife, I said, no, I think it would be more like Syria. Factions emerge, eschew the authority of the established a government, and begin to police their own areas. The feds would have a choice of what areas they try to secure, but much more like Syria, you will get a dozen different factions, and they're all going to be fighting each other. This idea that you'll have a North and a South is absurd. That was due to sovereign states aligning with each other, more akin to Europe going to war with each other than anything else. An actual civil war, well, these look like, let's say you're in New York City. An actual civil war, you'd have upstate New York and the jurisdictions just north of the city vowing allegiance to one group, pockets of Manhattan to another group. There would be fighting everywhere. The idea that you would just have an entire state aligned perfectly, that's silly. And so what I'm looking at is political factions on the rise. And I was told several years ago, it'll never happen because the security apparatus, the deep state, will never allow that kind of violence to escalate. And my response to these individuals was, what happens when the people in the federal government begin to align with one of the factions? And that's exactly what we've seen. I hate to say it, but I've not made broad predictions like on this day, this thing will happen. I've said, hey, man, if A happens, then B happens. And where are we now? The federal government has, of course, aligned itself with the far left. They have weaponized the DOJ against Trump supporters. While several years ago, we saw far left extremists attacking Trump supporters in the street, we are now seeing the federal government seeking to destroy the lives of Trump supporters. We learned that they were spying on individuals' bank accounts for buying the Bible, for purchasing certain items, specifically targeting the right. Now, I know. The federal government had targeted the Tea Party with the IRS a long time ago, and these things have been happening. But we're now at the point where the Biden administration is aligned, has provided financial resources to far left extremists, and now are aligned with the communists, I'm not mincing words, who are advocating for the destruction of the southern border. Regular Americans and the American voter base are not for this. Where are we now? A state has asserted sovereignty, has asserted supremacy over an international border. Now, the Constitution actually does give the jurisdiction to the federal government on international issues, but for this, it must protect states from invasion. The Biden administration is actively facilitating the invasion. Agents of the Customs and Border Protection Agency are engaged in one of the largest human smuggling operations we have ever seen. With smiles on their faces, these CBP agents are committing egregious crimes against humanity. Greg Abbott says enough. So I was asked, do you really think that you would have armed soldiers? And I'm like, that's the stupidest thing ever. Wow. Here we are. My friends, videos are emerging of the Texas National Guard being deployed. Armed soldiers have been deployed to resist federal agents. This is the beginning of armed conflict between a state and the federal government. And now we have many states, and I'll show you all their statements, lining up to support Texas. Now, voicing support, it means very little. Well, civil war is trending on Twitter right now, and many people are saying things like, oh boy, here it goes. I made the joke, it's the rise of the neo-Confederacy. Some leftists are saying these southern states, and South Dakota is one of those states too. That's pretty far north. I don't think the voicing of support means very much, if at all. Now, Florida sending material support and personnel, that's something. That'll be interesting. But things are starting to heat up, my friends. And I don't know where this goes. I can tell you that if the federal government wants to assert its authority, and it needs to, it will need to deploy armed soldiers to combat the Texas National Guard. That doesn't mean physical combat. I'm not saying they need to go there and fight people. I'm saying they will need an opposing militarized force to assert their authority over this jurisdiction. If the Biden administration says, okay, we can't escalate this, it's over. Texas wins, Texas continues its operation, and the border is secure. If the federal government wants to avoid looking weak and make sure that its authority is respected in this country, they're going to have to deploy military. Some of the things that we're seeing from the far left would imply that the federal government would have to declare insurrection and then send the military, U.S. Army, to Texas, or perhaps federalized National Guard from another state, in order to enforce their will, which is to engage in human smuggling. These people are evil. These are possibilities, but I don't know for sure exactly how it goes down. The safest way out for us probably is the Biden administration just backs down and gives up and loses. But the risk there is it further erodes, and to an extreme degree, federal authority, in which case more and more states will begin to act independently. Some people are for this. They say federalism, the states can do their thing. But it is supposed to be a union of states where the federal government protects our international borders. They're not doing that. Right now, a strike has already hit the federal government in terms of their capabilities. If Biden backs down, the federal government is just substantially weakened. Maybe that's the play. Donald Trump will win, but no one will respect anything the federal government does, and they will be viewed as impotent. Or maybe Joe Biden's play is mass human smuggling to destroy the fabric of this country, knowing full well what it means. Joe Biden himself said this in an unearthed video from 2007, that unchecked illegal immigration turns your cities to dirt. So he knows. We know for sure, and I'll play the video for you. Joe Biden knows exactly what he's doing with this human smuggling operation. And I will stress this as we get into the news. Each and every one of these CBP agents, I will do everything in my power to advocate for your imprisonment, that you will be criminally charged, and that we all watch as you go through the perp walk. I want to see each and every 19-year-old, 24-year-old, 30-year-old, I don't care. You're a CBP agent on the border. You're bringing these people in, putting them in cars and driving them to their destinations. You're a human smuggler. And I look forward to the day you are on trial in Nuremberg style, saying I was just following orders. No, I'm not saying what's happening right now is as bad as what happened in World War II, in the Holocaust. That's not my point. My point is you will not hide behind a badge saying I was told to commit a crime and get away with it. I'm going to make sure that I do everything I can to make sure you, CBP agents, spend your life in prison. I look forward to the day when the police come to your home, knock on the door with a warrant, And you say, what's this all about? And they say, sir, step outside. And your children are crying and your wife is screaming, no, no. And you say, all I did was smuggle humans. All I did was commit human atrocities. And we'll say, yeah. You think you're going to get any lenience from those of us, the majority of this country, those who believe in the law? You are a psychopath. Mark my words, CBP agents. I will request criminal referrals. Legal criminal action be held against you. You will get your day in court, and the whole world gets to see your justification for being a human smuggler committing atrocities. Atrocities. Now, let's be real. It's not the worst, but it is on the scale of atrocity, engaging in human smuggling operations. Enticing children to cross rivers and die, dangling things they can't have in front of them, laughing, and encouraging them to kill themselves crossing the desert. It's not as bad as some of the things we've seen throughout history, but it's one of the worst. I hope to see you behind bars. Let's get into the news, and I'll start breaking things down for you. Greg Abbott uses supreme law of Texas to give soldiers power over Biden. This is heating up. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has declared the state's right to self-defense, using the supreme law of the land to give soldiers power over President Joe Biden on immigration and the U.S.-Mexico border. He issued a statement on Wednesday criticizing Biden for violating his oath to faithfully execute immigration laws enacted by Congress. Vice.com. Extremists call for civil war and secession over Texas border ruling. Oh, yeah. You see, Texas has already long been pushing for such a thing. The Texit movement. Greg Abbott issued this statement. It is not taking things lightly. He says, despite having been put on notice in a series of letters, one of which I delivered to him by hand, President Biden has ignored Texas's demands that he perform his constitutional duties. President Biden has violated his oath to faithfully execute immigration laws enacted by Congress. Instead of prosecuting immigrants for the federal crime of illegal entry, President Biden has sent his lawyers into federal courts to sue Texas for taking action to secure the border. President Biden has instructed his agencies to ignore federal statutes that mandate the detention of illegal immigrants. The effect is to illegally allow their en masse parole into the United States. By wasting taxpayer dollars to tear open Texas's border security infrastructure, President Biden has enticed illegal immigrants away from the 28 legal points of entry along the state's southern border, bridges where nobody drowns, and into the dangerous waters of the Rio Grande. He goes on to mention points of the Constitution that Joe Biden has violated and his authority. Many people have lined up behind him. Some are calling for Texas independence. I'd like to show you some of these posts here. And let's see here. We've got the Utah governor, Spencer J. Cox. The border is a disaster that continues to spiral out of control, both in terms of people and deadly fentanyl traffic. This is not a partisan issue. This is a national security issue. This is a common sense issue. This is an American issue. Utah thanks Texas and Governor Abbott for stepping up where the Biden administration has failed over and over again. Brian Kemp of Georgia. Enough is enough. Our southern border is in crisis thanks to the Biden administration's refusal to do their job. Greg Abbott and the state of Texas have our full support. Glenn Youngkin of Virginia. Virginia stands with Texas. Greg Abbott is doing the job Joe Biden and his border saw refuse to do to secure our border. The Biden administration has turned every state into a border state. We must stop the flow of fentanyl, save lives, and secure our southern border. Greg Gianforte. Governor Greg Abbott is doing what POTUS won't. By refusing to act, President Biden is inviting cartels, illegal drugs, and human trafficking into the United States. We must secure the southern border. Now, this wasn't as direct as the other statements. This is Montana, of course, where others said directly, we stand with you. Greg just asserted that they agree with what Texas is doing. Kristi Noem of South Dakota. Greg Abbott is exactly right to invoke Texas's constitutional authority to defend itself. The Biden administration has created a national security crisis and put Americans in danger. Their failure is an unconstitutional dereliction of duty. South Dakota has been proud to help Governor Abbott's efforts to secure our border. We have Kevin Stitt of Oklahoma tweeting, Oklahoma stands with Texas. Jim Justice of West Virginia. We have a terrible crisis at the southern border. The Biden administration has turned every state into a border state. We must stop the flow of fentanyl, human trafficking, and criminal activity and secure our border. We support Greg Abbott and the state of Texas. And I believe in this tweet from Indian Bronson, he says, here are the American states which have lent their support to Texas or even provided assistance. Now, this is not every single state, but we did go through these. This doesn't include West Virginia. I'm hearing rumors murmuring, and it's probably, factual at this point. I don't know. I haven't been able to fact check. Alabama has also provided their support. But here's where we are. Tara Bull on X, she is a Spaces host, says these states have stepped up their support. Arkansas, Florida, Iowa, Idaho, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Wyoming. I've not seen any of those other states other than the ones that I've mentioned. So I'm not positive, but these are the messages that we are seeing. And now, my friends, if this escalates, and I don't see why it wouldn't, please provide me with any logical argument as to why any faction backs down. We are separated right now. From here to civil war, we are separated by the thinnest of veneer. A sheet of tissue paper is separating us from civil war. And I'll tell you why I say that. Joaquin Castro, Rep. Quesar. Castro says, Governor Greg Abbott is using the Texas National Guard to obstruct and create chaos at the border. Chaos. That's a lie. He says if Abbott is defying yesterday's Supreme Court ruling, POTUS needs to establish sole federal control of the Texas National Guard now. Rep. Quesar says, I agree with Joaquin Castro. If Abbott is defying yesterday's Supreme Court ruling, POTUS needs to establish sole federal control of the Texas National Guard. Democrats are calling on Biden to seize the authority over the Texas National Guard. Where do we go from there? Now, Marco Rubio's response is, members of Congress who demanded the National Guard come to D.C. to protect them after January 6th now demand Biden stop Texas from using the National Guard to protect Texas. Interesting response. What happens if Joe Biden declares he will be federalizing the National Guard, and for all servicemen and women in the Texas National Guard, they will report to the U.S.? Well, posse comitatus. You can't do that. You cannot use federal military for civilian law enforcement, which puts us in an interesting bind. It has happened before where the federal government has taken over a National Guard in order to enforce civilian laws. It requires more than just a presidential decree, but we will see. At this point, I don't know where this goes. The question becomes, if there is an attempt to federalize the National Guard, federalize the National Guard, who will the guardsmen side with? I don't know. The question is, where are these young men and women from? Are they from Texas? I'd imagine they are. And, Phil Labonte was mentioning, but they're trained at other Army bases. That's meaningless. Many of those who fought in the Civil War, the high-ranking officers, the leaders, the generals, they were trained at West Point in New York. But when it came down to it, there's actually some letters you can read from, I think Jackson and Lee. I forget who actually wrote it, but I was wondering how it is. You could have someone who is a Union high-ranking officer trained at West Point decide to join the secession and fight on behalf of a southern state. And it's really simple. They said, that's where I live. That's where my family's from. We are facing an interesting crisis now because we're not so much just about the state we're from. Back then, before the Civil War, your state was your state. You weren't born in Virginia and then typically moved to a different state. But one thing I think people need to realize, 80 to 90% of people in this country die within, 50 miles of the place they were born. And that's a question that needs to be asked. If Joe Biden says to Texas, you now report to me and you will remove that razor wire, what happens? Well, I'll give you a few principal scenarios. Of course, anything could happen. First, the Texas National Guard says, okay. And Greg Abbott says the National Guard has been seized by the federal authorities, by the federal government, and are now under their jurisdiction, and we have no control. The Texas National Guard then destroy the border barriers and allow the human smuggling operation to continue. Where we go after that, I don't know. Another scenario. The Texas National Guard says, F you to Joe Biden. High-ranking officers in the Texas National Guard instruct their men, do not obey Joe Biden. He does not have the authority here. The young men and women simply say, okay, just tell us what to do. Or we agree, and they cheer. And standoff remains. Joe Biden perhaps then declares insurrection, deploys military, and congratulations, the states are now fighting the federal government. I don't know. One possibility as well. Joe Biden makes an attempt to federalize the National Guard, and the National Guard of Texas is split, with some being loyal to Greg Abbott and to their home state, and others saying, we cannot allow this country to be torn apart. I don't know what happens. I can tell you this. When all is said and done, the good guys win. I mean, many people point out the Norm Macdonald joke where he says, I was reading a history book and, hey, great thing. You know, the good guys have won every single time. So it's a good point to be made. History is written by the victors. But I will tell you in this regard, Joe Biden is not on the right side of history here. He is committing human atrocities. Perhaps the lowest level, the high level being like outright genocide, but to a low level, human smuggling operations en masse, which are resulting in crisis, catastrophe, dehydration, starvation, filth, disease. People are dying in the desert, dying in rivers. As Greg Abbott points out, there's legal points of entry they could come to that are safe. Joe Biden is engaged in one of the largest human smuggling operations we've seen. Yeah, I got to be honest. It's typically not people like that win. It is typically those that believe in law and order and compassion that win. There's no compassion for tricking people into coming to this country in dangerous ways where they die and then sending them to concentration camps. I want to make this point. People get mad when I say concentration camp, but I don't know what other word to use. I understand the connotations because of World War II. Concentration camp does not mean prison, death, or work camp. It's a reference to when you take a large group of people and place them in a camp, concentrating them in a single area. Because of what Hitler did, concentration camp colloquially means death camp. What the Biden administration is doing and what Democrats are doing is proposing the construction of camps to hold and detain these migrants. New York has already, I believe, they've put in place a curfew for these people. When you begin to shuffle these people in through the border illegally, lying to them, putting them at great risk, and then propose camps to encapsulate them and restrict their movement. We can call it an internment camp if you'd like. I don't see someone like that winning this one. I want to pull up a video of Joe Biden. Let me pull up my Twitter here and see if I have this. This video is right here. End Wokeness posted this, and I want to play this for you now.
Would you allow these cities to ignore the federal law regarding the reporting of illegal immigrants and, in fact, provide sanctuary to these immigrants?
The reason the cities ignore the federal law is the fact that there is no funding at the federal level to provide for the kind of enforcement at the federal level you need. Pick up the New York Times today. There's a city not far across the river from my state that imposed similar sanctions. And what they found out is, as a consequence of that, their city went in the dumps, in the dumpster. Stores started closing. Everything started to happen. And they changed the policy. Part of the problem is you have to have a federal government that can enforce laws. This administration has been fundamentally derelict in not funding any of the requirements that are needed even to enforce the existing law.
So, Senator Biden, yes or no, would you allow the cities to ignore the federal law?
No.
Okay.
No. They turn to dirt. He knows exactly what he's talking about. He knows exactly what's going on right now. Joe Biden is aware that by allowing these people to come in the way he is, he will turn these cities to dirt. He knows. This was 2007. Joe Biden is intentionally destroying our cities and ripping this country apart and committing a human atrocity to do it. He is an evil man. With all of these states lining up, I wonder where we go. I don't know. I can tell you two things, though. Shout out to our good friend Vosh, far leftist, extremist, communist. He says, a constitutional crisis being employed for political theater. If Biden doesn't put a stop to this, it will be a sign of incredible weakness and an invitation for lawlessness from other Republican governors. I appreciate statements like this, and I encourage people to share these statements. Ian Crossland was talking about how he went to his parents. They're fairly normies, he describes them. He says they watch MSNBC, and they were shocked over the immigration issue. And he talked to them. They said it's a disaster. It's a catastrophe. You see, Vosh is a communist, and his intention is the destruction of this country, the fabric of this country. This is why, I mean, they support Palestine. They hate Israel. You don't have to, I'm not saying that every single person who does wants to destroy the United States, but it is a component in a bigger picture of people who hate the United States and want to see it destroyed. Now, to be fair, I understand there are certainly some people who love this country, want to see its borders enforced, and are isolationist and don't like what Israel is doing. I don't want to get into all of that debate. But Vosh typically takes the stance, anything destructive to the United States' interests is a good thing. Right now, he's lying. A constitutional crisis being employed for political theater, as if to imply that Greg Abbott has no real reason to try and enforce border laws. Okay, well, New York's complaining about it. Chicago is complaining about it. Texas is complaining about it. Florida is. All these other states. They're all taking this crisis seriously as it is causing harm. Chicago is putting illegal immigrants in the airport. Many airports are now housing illegal immigrants. In Chicago, they proposed building internment camps. That's right. And there was uproar, and so they canceled the project. When you have a Democrat mayor saying we're going to have to build a concentration camp for illegal criminal aliens, pretty sure it's not theater when someone says this must stop. The reason Vosh says this, he wants the crisis to happen. He wants the country to be ripped apart. Joe Biden is in violation of the law. There's no question. Crossing the border illegally is a crime. These people must be detained or repelled. In fact, in Texas, they've already drafted and signed a law asserting it is illegal to do this, despite the fact it's already federally illegal. Customs and border agents are committing crimes. They're in violation of federal law. They don't care. Lawlessness is what Joe Biden is doing. But I appreciate this tweet from Vosh because you show this to a regular normie or a default liberal watching MSNBC, and this helps expose what the left really is. They want this crisis. They want it to get worse. The problems you're experiencing, Chicago Democrats, they want it to get worse. If you want to resist this and make it stop, I'm not going to tell you to vote for Trump, but I'll certainly show you. You vote for Joe Biden, you will get more, and it will get worse. So perhaps civil war then. And surprisingly, it looks like we are at the point where you may actually get armed soldiers in active conflict with federal agents. I want to stress this point, my friends. Right now, we are currently in a position of armed conflict between the states and the federal government. Understand, conflict does not imply combat. Conflict. Two armed forces are butting heads and asserting authority over one jurisdiction. It is phase one of armed conflict. I'll put it this way. Some people just never want to accept it. They say, no, we're not there. We're not there. Let me know when a shot is fired. Right now, there are armed soldiers pushing out and repelling armed federal agents. What do you call it when two armed factions are fighting over one piece of territory? It's armed conflict. I didn't say it's active combat. Understanding that this is like basically the lowest degree of it. Yeah. Texas deployed armed soldiers to repel federal agents. If the federal government responds in kind, you may still not get active combat, but it is armed conflict in the lowest possible degree. I pray it does not escalate. I hope the Biden administration begins to work with Texas to repel the invaders and the criminals. And I hope they begin deporting these people. But it's clear, it's plain as day. The Biden administration knows what they're doing. They want more of it. And they'll continue doing it. What I fear is the most likely outcome here. Joe Biden, the White House, the federal government, will make attempts to either federalize the National Guard of Texas or declare some kind of insurrection and deploy U.S. military to assert control over the border. What would happen if Biden invokes the Insurrection Act, sends U.S. Army to open up the border and allow people in? I wonder how many American enlisted in the Army would say, yeah, I would like to be a human smuggler. So let me make this point clear to each and every one of you, and I hope you share this message. If you assist or have assisted Joe Biden in committing crimes against humanity, operating a human smuggling operation, next year, you will find yourself in prison. Your badge will not protect you. Your rank will not protect you. You commit a crime, we will seek accountability. So those of you who are engaged in human smuggling and crimes against humanity, CBP agents, and anyone considering supporting that criminal operation, you better pray that evil wins. Because when the good guys win, we will seek accountability. We will put you on trial. Your crimes will be seen. And your family members will ask you, why were you a human smuggler? Well, I was told to do it, you'll say. Wow. Heck of an excuse. To each and every one of these CBP agents, I don't care where you're operating out of. We've got a facility down the road here in West Virginia. I'll tell you this. If I was governor of West Virginia, oh boy, this is why I'll never be in office and why I shouldn't be. Maybe I should, I don't know. If I was the governor of West Virginia, I would immediately call on my AG. If I was the AG, I would immediately seek a warrant to raid the CBP facility, searching for evidence, communications of criminal activity pertaining to human smuggling operations. Customs and Border Protection are receiving orders. These men on the border are engaged in a criminal action, criminal activity, crimes against humanity. I don't care where your facility is. It's the same organization. And I think the videos of the southern border are more than enough to get a warrant to send state troopers, West Virginia police to the CBP facility to begin going through and searching for evidence pertaining to the crimes we know they're already committing. I want to make sure that everybody knows that. Because the only reason this is happening is because the spineless cowards in Customs and Border Protection are doing it. Because weak men think to themselves, no one will ever hold me accountable. Well, I'll make sure we do to the best of my abilities. And what does that mean? Criminal referral, an investigation. Many of these people probably will not be criminally charged, but there's video of these guys. I watched you load these criminal aliens into a vehicle and transport them illegally. We can watch the videos of it. Was that you? Well, I'll tell you, repent now. Come out. Assist the good guys in stopping the crimes against humanity. And I can respect that. But there are agents to this day on the border actively facilitating atrocities. No sympathy. I'll leave it there. Next segment is coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.